Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm super excited because we're going to be going to something that is historically going to be epic. We are going to Pueblo Grande Museum in Phoenix. I cannot wait. This is going to be absolutely epic, and it's right down this way. Let's go. Now before we make it in the door, however, we notice this sign which designates that this has been named a National Historic Landmark as of 1964. Now in addition, there is this sign right here that says the facility includes a 2/3 trail or 1 kilometer outdoor interpretive trail that explores all sorts of different things. Along those though is an 800-year-old platform mound. I cannot wait. This is going to be so exciting. Now on the channel we've been to a variety of different Native American sites and we've seen a lot of information about the First Peoples. However, today this is going to give us a new expansive chapter that we can kind of go into and learn a little bit more. So we're going to go inside first, see if they have a patch, get a map, pay, and then do the loop trail. It is warm today and I'm wearing black. Not the best of planning, but it's okay. We're going to do this. Looks like just before we enter there's a sign for the cost of admission. It's $6 for adults, $5 for seniors, $3 for ages 6 through 17, and children 6 and under are free. In addition, they do have a museum membership, so museum members are also free because you pay an annual membership. Let's go inside though. Okay, so I came into the first gallery to kind of get us started. They do give you a map with a trail guide and then also a map of the different galleries. You can find here on this just kind of the whole what it's about. There's also a QR code here that you can hover over to learn a little bit more. I really love this. They do provide some special programs at this facility, so we may be able to catch a little bit more information about those. But for now, we're entering into the exhibit hall. Now within this first gallery, there is a very large map here that kind of shows you where the canals would have been from the Salt River. So the Salt River, of course, is running right here, and you can find various points that we are visiting. For example, we went to Hole in the Rock, but here is Pueblo Grande here. And so as you're looking at this, it kind of gives you an idea as to the overall layout of different community villages. But then right next to that is actually a timeline of not only the world, but also here at Pueblo Grande. And you can kind of go through and learn a little bit more about each individual time frame and also what they might have found from that time frame here. Now, as we move through each of the galleries, it talks a little bit more about the people and also the environment, how it would have been different. Here we learned that unlike today, the Salt River actually ran year-round whenever there were settling natives here. And here you can find some of the many things that they have found from that time frame, including velvet mesquite and also the pike minnow right here, some fossils from that. Really fascinating stuff. But we also learn why they lived in the hot, dry land and that it provided a lot of different things for them. And here within the book, you can find the various plants and animals which you might find in this region, which is very fascinating. Now in this display we learn a little bit more about how they were farmers and how they cultivated plant species. And here you can find maize, cotton, squash, barley, and others. It's kind of interesting to see what all they would have been able to accomplish as a result of forming irrigation canals, which we learn even more about in this section. So from one display to the next, there are universal tying points that allow you to see the bigger picture. For example, we moved from farming into the kitchen. But before we do, we need to talk a little bit more about those canals. The canals were built, and as you could see, they went through a variety of different kinds of soils in order for them to have filtration and also be able to hold the water in these canals to move it. Here there's a small video that tells you a little bit more about how they could open and close basically little valves to allow the water to move into different sections. It would allow them to have better regulation so that whenever they were doing their seasonal harvest, they could make sure they had enough water to get there to have the crops really thrive. So that way, whenever you moved into the kitchen, they had more variety to work with. Of course, the hard work had just started with the canals. Then it came time to mill down things. And here you can find a few different items, including this mortar and pestle system that they had at the time. It's very different than what we would use now in traditional manufacturing. These jobs were hard and it took time. Nothing came easy. In fact, here we learn about the grinding and the crushing of the foods in order to make meal or flour, and then how foods were roasted in pits that were below the surface. And here you can see what one of those ground pits would have looked like. They lined it with these stones to keep the heat in, and then they would also line it with stones on the top. The food would cook inside here, and they would add any herbs that they wanted for seasoning inside this layer. Of course, one of the most beautiful pieces that I have learned about history throughout these places that we visited are that the stories were told through their dishes. And so as you look at the various kinds of dishes and patterns, you actually learn a lot more about the people than you might think. Once you start to learn why they created patterns or how they use certain kinds of dyes or even the sculpting process, you learn a lot about the resiliency of these tribes. Now in this section, we're challenged to think more about the home structure and the compounds that were created. Now, in this, we learn that they had a version of a suburb that stretched far north and east of the platform mound itself. And here you could learn more about what the interiors of some of those structures might have looked like, and also a bit more of the overall history. Now here, this is kind of interesting. This is a floor plan. You'll notice there were no square 90-degree angle sections. Everything was more rounded. They also used a variety of different kinds of materials in the construction of these that are not traditional for today's construction methods. Now, as we move through to arts and artisans, we learn a bit more about some of the crafts that would come from some of these villages. And we have a very interesting interactive exhibit here. It asks you which tool was used for each of these. Here we have a bowl, a shell pendant, and cotton yarn. Now, which tool do you think was used for the bowl? A stone axe, a stone anvil, or a wooden paddle? Let's see. They would use a paddle and an anvil right here. And it says the stone anvil is held inside and the paddle is used to shape the clay. Now, which tool did they use for the shell pendant? A drill point, a digging stick, or a spindle? Guess what? They used a flaked stone drill that was attached to a wooden shaft, and it was used for drilling holes, like the one in the pendant. Now I'm going to leave this one for you guys, so whenever you come, you can find out which tool that they used for the cotton yarn. This one's on you guys. But as we move past that, some of the intricate designs that they have here are just super impressive. I definitely encourage you guys to just look at the details very close on this. It is very impressive to see all of these amazing pieces and to know that these have withstood the test of time. But in addition to those crafts, we also have basket weaving. And here you can find a variety of different items that would have been used in the process for basket weaving, and then also one of the patterns from a woven mat fragment that was a historic sample that was found. Now, believe it or not, they actually also used a loom, and this is a very interesting way that they could accomplish things. This particular loom could be used by a single individual, and they could strap it to a tree or a post, and then it would hold it in place while they were able to work the pieces up and down. And this is what that kind of would have looked like here in the illustration. Now, in this region, they heavily dealt with trade, and you can find here that Pueblo Grande is pretty centrally located to a lot of trade routes and a lot of different things that might have been used in that. So each one of these you can find a specialty that might have been versed in that particular region. So here you can find not only the map, but also a little bit more about what would have been traded in versus traded out. And here you can have traded in, here you have traded out. And the Pueblo Grande, of course, had an abundance of threads and spindle work and crafts. And of course, because they were farmers, they had maize versus the things that they needed, which were shells or stones, pottery, or even copper bells. In fact, I really like how they lead you through the story of who the people are, what the people did, what they specialized in, and then bring you over to this side where it talks a little bit more about how they were able to use that in order to reach out to the outside world. I think that that is great, but we still have a lot of exploring in this exhibit hall. There's a couple more things that I definitely want to show you. In this section, we learn a little more information about the people, the culture, and then also some of the information that has been created in way of documentaries. There is also another QR code down here that tells you a little bit more about the city of Phoenix. It has some free games for the kiddos and talks a little bit more about Pueblo Grande. Now here, as we first enter the gallery, is also something that says Phoenix is their homeland, and it talks about each of the native peoples to this area and then where they might have called home. And I think it's pretty interesting to see the various groups that would have been in this area and which mountain ranges that they would have basically staked their claim on. And so here you can find all of that and get a bit more context before moving into the changing gallery. Now, as you can imagine, the changing gallery has a variety of different things that you can find throughout various times of the year when you visit. Currently, this is called the Zuni World. These are art pieces that are inspired by the Zunis, and along with the beautiful, vibrant colors, you can also find little placards below each one of them that tell a little bit more about the story. I'm going to show you a few of these, but definitely look into this, and if you're here when they're still doing this exhibit, take some time because the intricate work here is just absolutely amazing. For example, this piece right here is called Mesa Verde, and it is the Medicine Society settling into different places such as Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, the Navajo Monument, the Aztec, just along there. So you can see various representations and then also a little bit more information about the artist and what he created this piece on, which happens to be acrylic on canvas. Now this one's especially interesting because not only does it show some of the sites around the Chaco cultural area, but also it shows you a view from above if you were looking down on this section. And this is absolutely beautiful. It was created in 2012 and the artist is Joey Zuni. This is another one by the same artist, and you can see here the attention to detail. This one's called Lava Falls, Opposite Three Springs, and Hermitite Mine, and I really appreciate the color and depth in these pieces. It really is vibrant. I could definitely see this being like a trophy piece if someone were to have this in their home or their museum. It's gorgeous. But again, the gallery goes on and on and on, and I've only shown you a few of them, and you definitely need to take a moment to check these out. Not to mention there are a few historic maps so that you can find the topography of the area and then also where the people might have been. We are now moving into the galleries section, and I am very excited because as soon as we move in, there's this section called Dig It, and it just looks fun. In fact, here we have Umberto Gecko, and he says, imagine that this wall is a trench dug in an archaeological excavation. Let me show you around. Look at what all we're finding in here. We're finding trash, we're finding horseshoes, there's even a couple little bones, but actually it gets better and better. We're going to get closer to this again in a second, but This is a really cool setup. I like how it has the top image up here, which shows them actually doing the excavation. And then below it, you see some of the things that they might have found, the layers, and then also some of the other interesting stuff. Let's go. In fact, look at these guys. These guys are just digging away, trying to excavate something. And then this is what they run into right here. Amongst these layers of crazy, weird stuff, they're also cracking a code, an archaeological code. Here we learn some of the main terms that apply to this site. Archaeology, site, artifact, and excavate. Tells you about each one of them. And we also learn that these areas are not dug deep enough to display any kind of dinosaur bones. They would have had to have dug a lot deeper in order to find those. In this tools of the trade section, you see some of the larger excavating tools, but then you also see some of the smaller tools which would be used laying in this section, and a brief description as to what that they would be used for. I really like this illustration right here. It talks about the strata are the layers. So if you're trying to figure out how to like best understand the layers of the dirt, think of a messy closet and all the layers that go into it just to get to the bottom. It's kind of interesting because right next to that, then they have each one of the actual layers that we have encountered while digging in hopes of finding this amazing site outdoors. In all the museums I have been to, that is the first illustration that I have seen that is so simplistic, that tells you about how to think about layers in a way that makes sense to the average person. Now, additionally in this section, there are a variety of different kid-friendly items that you can bring your kiddos in so they can have a better understanding of the site as well. And I think that is super important because history shouldn't have an age, and all people of all ages should feel like they're included in history. Also, there are a lot of interactive areas back here that explain a few more things about finding seashells. Now, seashells, of course, being a part of the trade, we can see that the Pueblo Grande area is right here, and many of the shells that they would end up with were coming from this area in the Gulf of California or in the Pacific Ocean, which was quite a trek away, of course. Now, the last place we're going to stop here is Clues from the Clay, and our little gecko friend is mentioning that the pot beside us is super huge so we can see the clues and not have to have a microscope. So this thing is taller than me, and you can see from these signs that it teaches you a few different things. So it asks you, what is the latest style? So you can look through these styles. Again, there's very specific patterns, and you can find that this particular style was actually used during the colonial period. And it talks about the period's design included animals and people, and the dancers were very signature of that style. Again, we're gonna leave some stuff in this room for you guys to explore also, but there's one other room before we go outside, and this one looks very impressive also. Now, there's a statement here from the artist whose name is Thomas Breeze Marcus. Res life spans from rural and isolated to immersed and surrounded by urban sprawl, as well as everything in between. He goes on to speak a little bit more about life on the res and concludes by saying, When Res Dogs Howl is a series of work about the layers, complications, and duality of contemporary identities with traditional narratives and ancestral ties to the Sonoran Desert. He calls this one Breaking Traumas, and here you can find some glass that has been left in the desert and has been left there to degrade the land. Through each of these paintings, you'll find a near ghosting of images, and the closer that you get, the more that you can actually see within these. It's quite lovely and beautiful. It's also very poetic. I would love to find some of his large-scale things around town. As we move outdoors, we find our first sign and our first stop. This one talks about some of the essential tools. Again, we talked about these a little bit on the inside, but as you come outside, you're able to see them in the context that they would also be in. All of these stones right here could be used by hand to grind things. They could also use them to do a variety of other things, including washing clothes. So these stones would have many, many uses right here. But perhaps the larger commentary is what we are about to see. Now, this is what makes this site so significant. It's very different than any other site that you'll come to here in the Phoenix area. And I'm really excited because as a history buff, I like to get those little brain wrinkles, you know. So we're about to go check it out. I can't wait. As we enter into this section, this is a rough estimate as to what it would have looked like whenever it was in its prime. This is a cultural place, an ancient village site, and today it continues to be an important place for the affiliated tribes. Archaeological investigations here have also uncovered important details about the site's history and occupation. One of the most predominant figures of the site is actually a platform mound, which was initially constructed approximately 900 years ago. Now, throughout history, stories have been told in a variety of different ways. Sometimes they are passed down from person to person orally through words, like through a story. Other times through a song. Now, the song that they're talking about was that oral history, and you'll be able to see various points of that as we kind of meander our way through this site. Now, along the way there are lots of benches, so if you need to sit down you can, and that's perfectly fine. Take your time. However, I did bring water today, and I highly suggest that you do so if you're planning on being out here for very long. Now, just beyond this fence there is an irrigation canal, and we learned a little bit more about these irrigation canals inside. The prehistoric canal system was actually subject to flooding, and the ancestors constantly were having to repair that. However, these newer canals have the newer technology and are less likely to flood in those instances. However, many do go along the original canal lines. Now, as we move along the wide trail, we start to notice the edge of the structure revealing itself. Now, we will be going upwards in a moment, and you'll be able to see a little bit closer, but this is our first corner cap that is truly visible at a eye level kind of distance. It's very interesting to see the stacked rocks and also how the earthen dam around it has kind of fallen down a bit. But as we kind of move to the side, you can see the nice wide path on our way to get there, and it looks like there are a few things ahead of us that are looking very interesting. Let's go. Now, here we learned that the platform mound actually has another name, and I'm hoping that I'm not messing this up. The Va'aki, meaning ceremonial house in the native language. There are two kinds of these. The first is an ancestral platform mound like the one that we see, and the second one includes a single room ceremonial house like the one that's on this visual right here. Now, this area was one of the largest, and so whenever it was actually destroyed, it still had symbolic purpose for the culture, and so it's still considered a shrine to those who once were in this area. And I think that because of that, it's so important for us to come and take in and respect the space. Remember, guys, don't pick anything up at sites like these because it's not for us to take. It's just not. You can soak it in, you can appreciate it, but if you do find something that has historic value, you need to let them know as opposed to picking it up. Now, the first archaeological excavation of the platform mound took place in May and June of 1901. Dr. Joshua Miller, a medical doctor, actually led the investigation for the Arizona Antiquarian Association. In addition to clearing away soil and debris, he employed the dangerous technique of tunneling underground up to 70 feet. Now, in that feat of tunneling, you can see here, this is one of Miller's tunnels in about 1929. It looked like a very different structure than it does now. Another thing that we have learned from visiting is that they always had an issue with the erosion based on the irrigation away from the building. So here he's tunneling below to get inside. However, now we're able to see it from above, and you can see that they've put in some drainage to preserve the space so that it doesn't fill up and then erode away. Now, something I learned a long time ago by visiting lots of different archaeological sites, it's hard to envision the life that the people might have had because you're looking at pieces of history that are partially destroyed. But what they always encourage you to do is stop, take a moment, take a deep breath, read the history, and then envision what it would have been like at that time in your mind's eye. Now, my mind's eye goes a little crazy because this structure is huge, and I can only imagine how many people could have been on this site bustling about. After going through the museum, seeing some of those tools that they would have been using, I could easily see some of these areas being set up with lots of people grinding down grains and lots of people cooking and children scurrying about, men out not only maintaining crops but also hunting occasionally, and calling this like their overall community hub. Here's where you would find them trading and talking on behalf of the tribe as to what could be best for their next jump through to the next place that they would go. It's kind of interesting to see, if you really think back to all the elements that they include inside the museum, as to what you could envision the people here doing. And I think that that's why places like this are important. They give you a blueprint for the basics of what could have been life, and then you can fill in the blanks with the details that they provide to you on the inside. I think that that's great. But with that said, I also have a little bit of a historic reference here for you. The signs. Always look at the signs. Here you will find what the storage room might have looked like, and also how they would have been able to use this space and what kind of materials that they would have used to create the pieces that we're looking at. Right next to this, you have a full open room where you can implement some of those things directly into a space that is very visible. So for example, the walls would use these earthen structures, which were made of stacked stone and also adobe, and then they would be large and very stable. Somewhere around here probably would have been a little ladder to get in and out of this pit-like structure. And then we move over to this section, which likely has something beneath as well. And then you could see where the wall structures are kind of around us, and it just continues to go on and on. Again, it's a very different look than it would have been when the first people were here using this facility. However, throughout time, it's looked a lot of different ways. As you could see before, whenever they were tunneling underneath, it looked much more like a crag than the flatness that we have around us. They've excavated this site heavily, as you can see, and they've been able to rehome some of the artifacts that were found here, not only in the museum, but also within the native people themselves, which I think is very important. Now this section is called the Northwest Compound. It is a complex block of rooms with open courtyards, and it was constructed between the platform mound and the massive adobe wall that surrounds the entire encampment. The rooms here were spaces that were constructed during the classic period between AD 1300 and AD 1450. They were not residences, but they were used for a variety of different ceremonial and also crafting activities. Now we'll get a little bit closer to that adobe wall in just a few minutes, but it is at least 3 feet high, and it is super thick, and definitely something that would have protected the in and out of the main platform complex here. That was very important. They wanted to make sure that they were always taking care of this area because it was considered sacred. Now from the wall, supposedly you wouldn't be able to see all of those areas that we just looked at either, which is really interesting. But we are about to move down, and we'll get a closer look as we move into the next section of the outdoors, which has some very cool structures to say the least. Also, you might be asking yourself, why is such a historic place in the middle of a bustling city? Well, at one point, the people chose this place based on the water flow and movement for the farming. And because of that, more people would come here, which is what eventually led to the actual inception of Phoenix proper. Now, the city itself continued to grow, but this continued to kind of be buried beneath. And so whenever it was rediscovered that it was here, they wanted to preserve it. Rather than trying to like move away the history or bulldoze it down, they wanted to keep it because it's so important. So the city just kind of formed around and continued to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Guys, this is that wall that we were just talking about. It's a little taller than me, and it's pretty thick. In fact, if I were to just do my cell phone, you could see it's probably like 2.5 of my cell phones, if not 3, across. Yeah, so that's the wall right there, but we have some more to look at. In fact, the trail continues this way. Now again, as we go from sign to sign, we are asked to envision different scenarios, and this one asks, why would the tribe settle in the hot, dry desert? Now the interesting thing was, like we learned inside, it wasn't always hot and dry here. In fact, the river used to run non-stop. The weather patterns have changed in this area to the extent that now it is very dry and very hot here. But whenever the first people lived here, it wasn't this way. No, it was not. It was much, much different. And that's what made cultivating life here so much easier. Now over time, drought has come along. Over time, rain has moved about and doesn't fall in this area near as much. So that's what's made it a lot more inhospitable. However, as the first people found this area, it was actually beautiful. A lot of areas were covered in grass, and the Salt River was moving and flowing constantly, and that made it very comfortable. Time to get a little bit of a drink before we go back in the sun. Always appreciate the shade when you're in Phoenix. Now, as you can see, the path in this section is also nice and wide. This is very user-friendly. Anyone could come out here, and as we go around this section, we're going to find a variety of different structures. Now, in this section, we learn more about the suburb area. Now, these are all replica buildings, but they are reminiscent of AD 1300. And here you can find what the shapes would have looked like, fully covered in adobe, and then also the freestanding buildings, what that they would have been like. These were surrounding the area of the big platform, and each of these structures was surrounded by its own walls for protection. Now, adobe was chosen because it would insulate very well, but also it didn't require as much wood. Wood was much more scarce in these regions, even during the heyday of the Salt River moving constantly. And so, in order for them to use the things that they had, they used this earthen structure of the adobe to make these pueblos. And it's really fascinating to see up close, but also whenever you step inside, the temperature difference between the outside and the inside is vastly different, and that was by design, by using this particular kind of material. Again, tons of information here about the difference between the pit house and then also the adobe houses. Pit houses were the first and most common form of shelter used at the Pueblo Grande. They were a shallow pit that was dug about 1.5 feet deep into the ground, and then that would provide a bit more insulation. But the adobe house construction was similar to a pit house, although it did use some upright wooden posts that were used to support a ridge pole. So right here, you can see that whenever we were inside a while ago. Very different structure. Now here we get to see a pit house replica in person. In fact, there are a trio of them standing right before us. These replicas of pit houses are actually made from modern materials, though the details of the structures are over 1,000 years old. Now, there are a couple of big differences between these and the traditional ones, and there's nothing they could do about it if they wanted to recreate these so that we could visually come out here and see them. Building codes are not what they used to be. In fact, building codes didn't used to exist. So the original structure would have gone down about a foot and also would have had a slightly less tall ceiling. These are up to code so that they meet modern standards. So they do look a slight bit different. However, they're not so different that they don't have the same symbolism. And we're about to go inside and kind of look at one of them, and you'll understand why it's important that they do have one of these here. Now, normally you would enter through this. However, that clearly does not meet the standards, and it's very, very short. So instead they have this, which is much taller and also handicap accessible. Again, inside here, much cooler than it is outside and just walking literally inside the door. Now, something kind of interesting about this is you can see that the ground does drop down about a foot like it's supposed to, but they do have it sloped, so whenever you come in, all people can come in. I think that's really nice. I think that that's really important and also very nice. But also something that I wanted to kind of show you was the walls themselves. In fact, look at this a little bit more closely. You'll notice that the walls are covered in these sticks, and that actually forms an additional layer of insulation in addition to the Pueblo adobe. Also, you'll see that these go across the ceiling and they have rafters. They're using almost like a twine to tie everything together. It's really fascinating, and this room is big enough where numerous people could come inside. Of course, the more you look around, the more you will find. There are also small signs that signify what kind of plants are available to us. And this is actually the velvet mesquite. We saw some of the beans of this inside, but now you can see what it looks like here in front of us. And this tree is giving us life. It is giving us beautiful, amazing shade, and it feels so, so good. Now this area right here is a very interesting space. It actually says that the ancestors would emerge from the underworld and they were sent to spy on the surface and let them know what to expect. This is one of the places where they would do something that they refer to humbly as games. These aren't your normal games though. These games are occasions for ceremonies that bring rain, social gathering, or peaceful distribution of goods. Now, as we continue to move forward, we learn more about a kitchen in the desert. Now, we learned previously how that they would prepare some of the foods, but we're about to see what that would look like in the actual structure. Gardens like these would have been planted by the first people, and irrigation ditches like the ones that you're seeing going around this would have been how that they moved the water to these areas. Now, an encased structure like this would help to prevent the wind from getting to them as they cooked, but it would be open so that the smoke could be released. Now inside, clearly there are a few modern amenities here that wouldn't have been present. However, the overall concept is the same. The fire would have been in the middle, right where you see these cinder blocks, and they likely would have had storage on the back wall, similar to these plastic shelves that are currently here. And they would have been able to keep their additional firewood over here in the corner to keep the fire going while they were doing a variety of different things. And do you remember that oven from the inside? Well, here you can see the ancestral Sonoran Desert people oven. This is what they would have used. It would have just looked like a really big fire ring. However, these would have measured up to 9 feet in diameter, and they could have prepared large quantities of food, enough for massive gatherings of people. And it would have looked kind of like this. Now, just past this section, you can either go back toward the lobby and also the museum, or you can go continue along the loop trail if you did not finish looking up top at the upper area. Now, I would definitely recommend taking your time up there, and if you didn't have a lot of time to spend when you were first up there, to revisit it after learning a little bit more about these structures. Now, for the time being, I'm going to move back into the museum area, but I wanted to show you guys there's a nice picnic area here and also another building that we're going to pass by that I think is kind of interesting. So let's go. Just outside of this building that I'm really excited about sharing with you all, a celebration of Roger Lidman, a champion and a friend of the humanities. There are quotes here that say, "History cannot give us a program for the future, but it can give us a fuller understanding of ourselves and of our common humanity so that we can better face the future." I think honors like these are so important because they symbolize the people who make these places possible. So stopping at them to share them with you is always important to me. I think that more people should take an interest in not only the preservation of historic sites, but also the education that is out there. A lot of times, based on how much time that you have when you're actually in school, you miss out on all the really cool brain wrinkles because they're just cramming as much as they can into a very small window. So it is up to us as we get into our adult years to continue to find those brain wrinkles and to be advocates for the places that provide them. Now, just down the way here, that's the entrance. However, this building right here that we're standing under, this wonderful shade, is actually a whole different experience. And sometimes you can visit this location and sit in on special talks and programs. And I think that that's what makes this site great, because they do have those continued education moments. Okay guys, that's gonna do it for me here at this amazing Pueblo Grande. I had such a wonderful trip. I hope you guys did too. Remember, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time, and brain wrinkles that take us down the roads of history are definitely that. Until next time guys, bye!